Alrighty, I really wanted to get to this yesterday, but sadly I did not have the time to record anything. What the hell was that? What did we just watch on Thursday? That was the most remarkable evening in American television, if you want to include Tucker as a part of television, which I think is fair since, he is sort of a he is someone from the TV world who has transitioned to the digital space, and I think the line between television and digital broadcasting is certainly blurred at this point. But first, you have that rather um, unsettling interview between Tucker and Putin, which say what you will about it, was nothing at all like what the American media was predicting. Obviously, it wasn't going to be what they were predicting, but it wasn't what I predicted either. I didn't expect Putin to come in and try and just dominate Tucker and be rather nasty to him. I guess just to show that he's the big man. And then while that was going on, while I was watching that, trying to process everything in the Tucker Putin interview, Biden, I guess, got jealous that everyone was watching Putin. And so he came out and said, I want to do my own press conference. I want to give my own speech. So everyone will listen to me and not watch the Putin interview, to try and get that out of the headlines. And I firmly believe that was strong motivation for why Biden came out and gave his press conference. And if you notice, the next day, and even that night, most of the news was about Biden and not about Putin. So, for better or for worse, even if they were saying, "Oh my God, Biden's completely senile, he's done," well, at least they weren't talking about Putin, and maybe that's a win from the White House's perspective. So, before I get to that, though, I think I want to completely go over my thoughts on the big Putin interview. Because Putin doesn't give a lot of interviews, and the ones that he does give, tend to be enlightening. You learn about how he thinks, but honestly, I don't think that there was much new. I mean, there were little bits and pieces that were new information that came out of this interview, but mostly it was just kind of like a Putin speech. And I've seen Putin give speeches on the war in Ukraine before. I am familiar with the history, although here's the thing. I get that Putin wanted to reset the whole issue, start from the beginning, and introduce an American audience to the history of this region. Okay, that's fair. I understand that strategy, not just starting it, hey, let's talk about January 2022. Let's go back to the 9th century. I can understand that approach, because history did not begin in the year 2022. Fair enough. If Tucker didn't even understand what Putin was going for, and Tucker didn't understand what like his argument was, the audience isn't going to understand that either. So if Putin's maybe Putin just doesn't care. Maybe he doesn't care about explaining his position to the Western audiences. But if so, why do the interview at all? Why let Tucker interview you if you just kind of want to autistically talk about whatever you want without actually trying to persuade, without giving a thesis. There was no thesis to his argument. He just started going through history, and the most significant part of that whole history lesson is that modern Russia was born in what is today Ukraine. Kiev was the old capital of Russia when it started out. And Putin, if you listen to what he says, okay, yes, that you would infer that from what he said, from the history, that is obvious. But he does never state that conclusion. That is the conclusion that should be drawn from the early history that he went over. He never said that. He just goes through all these things. He lists all these facts. He goes all these dates in order. And, that is not the way to teach history. I would think anyone who's taught a history class would know that. You don't want your students to just memorize a bunch of dates. You have to give those events, those dates, they need to have a meaning. People need to understand in their head the significance of those events. And I don't think he did that at all. So his history lesson to me was largely a failure. Uh, I talked to people who are, not informed on this issue, who watched the interview just because of all the hype, and they didn't get anything out of it. It was way over their head. And so you could say, oh, well, that's because the American public's too stupid. It's like, okay, that's fine. You can call the American public stupid all you want. It still was a waste of his time. Putin spent 2 hours sitting down trying to explain this to a Western audience, and in my view, he completely failed to do so. And so then once we got to the present day, and we're talking about the, present day, present time, the things that Putin said were, I don't know, maybe they're things that he himself has not directly said publicly, but they're things we already knew, like, obviously Russia thinks that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Everyone believes that. I mean, heck, I think even the United States, even though the United States doesn't admit doing it themselves, I think they blamed it on Ukraine. I think they said Ukraine blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which is like, unthinkable. And he said, obviously, he would like to negotiate an end to the war, which, Russia has never refused negotiations. They've had lots of negotiations, as Putin said. This is all public record stuff. I kind of, I get that, Tucker was asking these questions, I guess, to, trying to use the Socratic method, I guess, to get Putin to say it. But, this is... It's like not even a question worth asking. Oh, would Russia be willing to negotiate? Russia's never walked away from negotiations that I've seen in any of these. I've followed every peace talk they've had, which they haven't had any in a very long time. But I think I've followed them pretty closely. And the Ruskies have never, come out and told the press and said, we're done with these peace talks. We can't work with these Ukrainian Nazis. And Putin reiterated the story of the talks in Istanbul, and he confirmed what had been reported, which I had talked about on this channel at the time, that Boris Johnson had gone in there at the behest of the United States and completely squashed the peace. Zelensky had already signed onto Putin said not everything that they wanted, but signed on to a lot of it and said, okay, yeah, we can do this, this, and this, and, things were moving forward, and that's why Russia pulled the troops back from Kiev. All of this lines up with what we already knew. I guess maybe we just haven't heard Putin himself say it directly. But if I'm looking at this from the perspective of, Russian public relations, Russian propaganda, everything in this interview that made Putin and Russia look good came in the latter part, after the history lesson. The history lesson just kind of fell flat, in my view. It was interesting to listen to. It's not a part of history that I'm super familiar with, but it's things that I generally like. It all sounds familiar. Like as he's talking about how the borders shifted over the centuries, I can picture in my mind from memory, what the maps looked like. I've seen those maps before. I haven't studied the wars that shaped those maps in depth. But again, it was, I think, far too much of an abstraction. And he needed to ground it in some kind of narrative. And you know what? Maybe that's the problem. In the West, we're so used to narratives. Everyone has a narrative. The government always has their narrative. They're always on message. Putin was not that. He did not seem to have much of a narrative. Or at least there was no narrative structure. So one last note, the tension between Tucker and Putin, I think, was something nobody expected. Obviously, the media expected them to be best buddies, but I didn't expect that. But I expected them to be cordial, and perhaps you could say they were. But Putin did not seem to be a fan of Tucker. Did not seem to trust him one bit, which again goes back to why take the interview. I guess Putin has done a lot of hostile interviews with American media before. So that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But I would have to think that Tucker was far less combative than most of those people. I know for a fact an American, 60 Minutes is not going to let you, go on talking uninterrupted, for even 3 minutes. they're going to talk over you, interrupt you, and call you Hitler. That's how 60 Minutes or NBC News or CNN would have treated Putin. A funny highlight, though, not really relevant to a whole lot, but something interesting was Putin pointed out when he was talking about the CIA wanting to kill him. I guess he pointed out it's probably something that the FSB would be able to turn up, or is it which one is it? Is it the FSB or the GRE? I think it's the FSB that would be. That probably would have been the one investigating Tucker before this interview. They turned up. I guess that Tucker tried to join the CIA at some point, which wouldn't surprise me. I think didn't. I mean, Tucker's from D.C., obviously. Did he go to Georgetown? He kind of has that air about him, like he's someone who went to Georgetown. And Georgetown is a CIA, State Department, spook factory. And so the translation is a little murky to me because it's really hard to translate subtleties. So I'm not sure what Putin meant by this, but he said something along the lines of, when he was asking Tucker, like, oh, who's doing all these things? He's like, well, the CIA. As it would have it, an organization you tried to join at one point. But they're a serious organization, so thankfully they didn't let you in. Or maybe I have those two statements reversed. Maybe he said, but thankfully they didn't let you in, or let us be thankful, or something like that, and then followed it up with, but they're a serious organization. And so I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be an insult to Tucker or to the CIA. And so, like, was he trying to say they didn't let you in because they're a serious organization? Like, that's why you didn't get in? Like, was he saying thankfully for the CIA's sake? Like, because had they let Tucker in, he would have been a buffoon and not been very skilled at his job? I'm not entirely sure. It also might have just been a warning, because obviously Russia doesn't like spies, and so, he's signaling to Tucker, like, hey, you're on thin ice. I know you tried to apply to the CIA once, and just because our records show you didn't get in doesn't mean that you're not. You're kind of a little close there. You're on the line, and so, don't fuck with me. I don't know. I guess I give Tucker a lot of credit for keeping a calm face, because clearly Putin was trying to intimidate him the entire time from the very beginning, and was very condescending. Which, again, to me, if I'm looking at this from Russia's perspective and I'm trying to essentially make my pitch to the West, of my side, I don't know. Being a jerk like that doesn't. I don't know what the calculus was on how that would make them look. Again, maybe they just don't care. Maybe they're not. Maybe the point of this interview was not to try and make his pitch of his side, to the West. But if not now, I guess never. Maybe they were just there to screw with them. But again, I don't get that. I mean, to me, if I were in the Kremlin shoes, not just Putin, everyone there, I would say, hey, Tucker is kind of a fair guy. This is probably a chance for us to get a good shake at making our case, and maybe a bunch of people in the West will watch and see that we're not so bad. And I just didn't get that. Now, obviously, I'm not going to turn into some, one of these, like, NATO cucks who is obsessed with, hating Russia. I don't. I feel the same about Russia as I did before. Pretty indifferent, and I don't think that they're, like, the big baddies in the world. But I'm no more endeared to Russia, I'll say that, as a result of this interview. I didn't come away from this interview thinking, those Russian guys, they're pretty cool, and they make some decent points. No, I did not get that impression at all. So anyway, I ran very long on that. Let me try and get just through Joe Biden here in a minute. So Biden clearly felt upstaged by Putin. He did not like that Putin had an interview dropping in prime time in his country that was going to be watched across the West. It was so hyped up, and so he called his own press conference so he could give his own speech on the topic of his memory and how good his memory is, despite what the special counsel says, which a special counsel report came out earlier on Thursday on the whole scandal with Biden leaving classified documents in his garage, because after Mar-a-Lago got raided by the Secret Service, was it? Or was it the Justice Department? No, I think it was Justice Department. And they took away a bunch of documents that Trump had stored at Mar-a-Lago, and said, oh, these are classified documents, you're not allowed to have them, blah, 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 blah. There's a whole legal argument about that I won't get into here. Well, then some whistleblower who thought, well, that's bullshit, knew that Biden also had documents that he kept at his house. And so somebody ratted on him, and so the Justice Department kind of had egg on their face, and they're like, okay, well, we have to go get these documents now from Biden and do some kind of an investigation to make it look somewhat fair. And so they did their investigation. A special counsel was appointed, and the special counsel, according to a bunch of Democrats on Twitter who don't like the special counsel, they said, well, this is a Republican prosecutor, it's purely political. Well, that special counsel still decided not to prosecute Biden for these documents, and part of the rationale given was that you'd have a very difficult time convincing a jury that Biden intentionally absconded with these classified documents, because based on the interviews I've had with him, he clearly has memory issues, and he cited specific examples of how Biden couldn't remember when he was vice president. He couldn't remember certain details about debates surrounding the war in Afghanistan. And so the special counsel in his report basically said, Biden's not all there. If we put him on the stand, he's going to look like a senile old man, and we as prosecutors are just going to look like we're bullying a dementia patient. Because I guess part of this crime to do with the classified documents has to do with intentionality. And so if Biden is a senile old man who doesn't know what he had for breakfast this morning, it's going to be very difficult to prove intentionality to a jury who's going to be very sympathetic towards, an old man who doesn't know where he is and is confused and obviously, would not do well in like prison or something. And so Biden wanted to come out and rebuff that and say, hey, this stuff about memory loss, that's nonsense, it's not true. And then he came out and made a bunch more gaps that did not make his memory look very good. And it didn't go over well. So I don't know where they go from here. The Dems seem pretty committed to keeping him around, but you never know. Nothing's really over until the convention, I guess. Although, remember, even after the Republican convention in 2016, they were still trying to find a way to replace Trump. Like after the Access Hollywood tape, they wanted Trump to drop out and somehow make Mike Pence the presidential candidate. But you don't want to do that late. If you're going to replace your candidate, you want to do it sooner rather than later. And here's the thing. Biden is not going to make it through another 4 years. Now, I know a lot of people said that in 2020. Oh, Biden can't make it through 4 years. He looks a lot worse now than he did in 2020. In 2020, they were able to, at important times, get him, I don't know, whatever they did, dope him up or something to make him seem coherent, for an hour or two at a time so he could speak, so he could do the debates. There's going to be no debates this year, certainly. But after this election, if they can just get him through this, get him over this hurdle, he's going to be able to ride off into the sunset. Which, frankly, is what he should have done after the 2020 election. After he was inaugurated, he should have, But the problem is Kamala Harris. They don't want Kamala Harris to be vice president. If they could get her off the VP ticket, I would say guaranteed Biden is not going to stay president once reelected. He'll be reinaugurated, and then he will, he would resign, and the new vice president would become the regular president. So we'll have to wait for the convention. But so far, all indications are Kamala Harris is staying. And as long as that's the case, they don't want her to be president because she's a buffoon, and she would be harder to control than Biden because she's not senile, even though she is an idiot. And so, nothing else. They can prop Biden up like Woodrow Wilson and just keep his corpse, keep his pulse going. But you never know. 4 years, when you've got someone who's that frail, that's a long time. I mean, like, to stay alive. It's tough. When you get to that point in your life, every day is kind of it's tough. It's shaky. It's a struggle. And so I don't even know if he would be alive in 4 years, to be honest. Especially, with that, with if there's any sort of presidential pressure on him at all. But I think it's almost guaranteed. We all know, even now, he's not like fulfilling normal duties or anything like that. They have to give him a very light load every day, maybe a briefing, and that's about it. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here in the next one.